Welcome back, and we're going through a series of videos on how to double the number of guests who return to your church. And I hope you were able to view the first video where we just went to 6 reasons guests are coming to your church in the first place. You need to view that. Sit around with some of your leadership if you have not already viewed it, or if you viewed it once, bring them back to that one, because it is foundational for everything that we're going to talk about now. Please, as a reminder, understand this. This is not some type of theoretical exercise where I have some type of good idea and I hope it works. This is what is actually happening in churches that are seeing an increased flow of guests. The other thing I want to remind you is I do not think by any way that saying that you can double the number of your guests is an outlandish statement. I really believe that for many of your churches that could be a minimum. Now, can this happen just by, doing a few of these or just watching the videos and hope it happens? No, this requires work. It requires strategy, which means you are actually planning to do something. It requires a cohesive effort of many people in the church, but it can be done. It can be one of the most incredible ways that you can get the message of the gospel into the community by people in the community coming into your church. So, we're asking this question now: what if you could double the return rate of your guests? And I am going to respond with 7 major ways to double the number of guests who can return. 7 major ways. It's not necessarily an exhaustive list, but of the churches that have reported to us on the information of guests, this is really the top of the list. So let's go through these one by one, because they are very, very important. Number 1, get your members uncomfortable. Members, like anybody else, get into a rut or a routine. For those of you who listen to me on the podcast or read my information on the blog or are a part of Church Answers, you know very well that I talk quite often about the church I attend, the little church that just started this year in Spring Hill, Tennessee, the Church of Spring Hill. And it's a church plant, and it's doing well. And you know what I'm finding out about myself? I'm getting into some routines. I'm sitting on the second row all the time, usually the third or second seat from the aisle, and I'm almost uncomfortable going to the other side of the aisle. I've really become a left-seated church member. And it's really strange that I'm talking about get your members uncomfortable because I'm in this rut and this routine. Here is what I'm saying about get your members uncomfortable. We all get into the routine. And if you're in a routine and a rut, which all of us get into at some point, you, the church member, you're not going to make an effort to reach out to guests who are there. And so the leadership has to give a constant reminder: don't get too comfortable. Jonathan and I were in a church several months ago where they have this time where they have everybody stand up, and it's moved from where you've been the last few weeks, the past few months, and everybody stands up and they move to another location. He's very intentional about it. He says, don't want y'all to get into a routine or a rut. I want you to move around. And maybe you don't get them to stand up and move, even though I think that was very effective. But you remind people on a constant basis, don't get too comfortable with your seat. Don't get too comfortable with the same fellowship patterns, that you talk to the same people, that you relate to the same people. Get uncomfortable in the church. I'm getting uncomfortable in my church. You know, those who know me, I'm an introvert. I'm going out of the way to speak to people that I don't know in the church. And sometimes it's really uncomfortable when I go up there and I introduce myself, because I don't know how to make small talk. But I go up and introduce myself, and I've learned that there's a few questions. Hey, how'd you find the church? Is there anything that I can do to give you some information about the church? Tell me about your family. Just some very basic questions. That's uncomfortable for me. Some of you are extroverts. I hate you. You can just talk about anything. But some of you are like me, and it's not natural. Get your members uncomfortable. So that's one way. You have to constantly remind your people to be uncomfortable. Secondly, the power of sitting next to a guest. I want you to watch in your church what happens when a guest comes in. Let's assume that it's a family of 4. Most of the time, they're going to go sit down, usually near the middle or the back, somewhere in that area, and they're going to sit by themselves and wait for the service to start. And none of your members are going to sit next to them. That is so common. What if you had some intentionality that people in the worship center, the sanctuary, would be on the lookout for such guests, and they would make an effort to go sit next to that family or to that person? You know what's going to happen? The chances of that person returning for another visit will increase dramatically, just by the simple act of your members sitting next to them. So maybe one of the ideas, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, maybe one of the ideas is to actually have greeters in the worship center whose very purpose is to look for guests who are seated by themselves and sit next to them. Huge power of getting them to return because of the relationships that are developed. Third, get your members in the habit of inviting people while they are there. Inviting them to what? They're already at church. Inviting them to Sunday school, inviting them to a small group, maybe inviting them to lunch. Some kind of invitation has an incredible power to it that will get your guests to return a second time, a third time. And when that happens, you will see the flow of guests, especially return guests, to increase dramatically. Fourth, get the card. I'm talking about the guest card. I know we've been doing this for decades, but it is one of the most important ways that you can get a guest to return. Now, sometimes you need to say, we just need a minimal amount of information. Hey, at a minimum, give us your name and email address, and just let us send you a quick email. If you're comfortable writing more information, I would appreciate that. We found at our church that well over half of the people are happy to put their address down, and when we put their address down, the pastor is actually doing a handwritten letter to each of them, which again, that has power. Get them to fill out the card. How do you do that? If you haven't heard this, I absolutely love it. We're doing it at our church. Others are now doing it with incredible success rate. Stand up, whoever is about to talk about the guest card, and say, hey, we got a guest card. Usually you say it's in the pew rack or it's in the chair rack in front of you. Take it out. And if you're a guest or even just a member, if you fill out that card, maybe just your name and your email, maybe a little bit more information, we're going to make a contribution to a local ministry. At our church, we give $5 to the local food ministry for every card that is turned in. That becomes an altruistic motive for them to fill it out. And it really becomes a ministry of the church. Get the card. It's critically important. That's how you get guests to return, because you can follow up. Number 5, if the kids are happy. Hey, listen, if parents come with children, maybe students, but particularly children, if parents come with children and the kids come away saying, I love that church, then the likelihood is the family is going to come back. So this opens up a whole nother conversation to itself. It's about children's ministry. It's about preschool ministry. But it tells us how critically important those ministries are to get guests to return. So one of the ways that you get guests to return is you're constantly asking this question: what can we do to enhance our children and our preschool ministry? Because if the kids are happy, the family is happy. If the family is happy, they will return. Number 6, I'm going to say a word about stand and greet time. If you've never heard me comment about it, or if you've never read any blog posts that I've written about it, you know that I've created quite a stir by talking about stand and greet time. Stand and greet time is in churches, and some churches call it different things, but just humor me on this. It's when you stand up at the welcome time, everybody stands up and says, turn around and greet someone. Now, I personally do not like it, but I'm not advocating one way or another here, but I'm just saying I personally do not like the stand and greet time, because it just feels so artificial. And then people come up to you and say, it's good to see you today. I'm thinking, you don't care if I'm here or not. I mean, you're just words, and I may be a bit cynical there. But here's what I want to say about the stand and greet time. If the stand and greet time is the only time that you're greeting guests, it is actually more negative than positive. Now, if it is a supplemental, you can argue that it's okay. I'm not going to get into that debate. But if your people are quote unquote trained only to speak to someone during the stand and greet time, they are actually going to appear more unfriendly than if they never spoke at all. Guests will come away saying, yeah, they had this artificial time called a stand and greet time. That's the only time anybody spoke to me. So the word that I want to give you on this, I'm not going to get into the debate about whether you like it or not. You know my opinion. But if your members are only greeting during that time, it is actually more negative than positive. Seventh, to get guests to return, you have to have an incredible greeters ministry. I cannot imagine any church, any size, not having a greeter ministry. There's so much to say here that I'm going to say it in the next video. But this is about getting guests to return. And I want you to just get ready to hear some information about greeter ministries, because one of the most important things that can happen is to have well-equipped, well-trained greeters in such a way that they are making an incredible difference on getting people to come back into the church. So, 7 major ways to get guests to return. And I think even double or more. Constantly have your members get uncomfortable. Sit somewhere else. Remind them. Sit next to guests. Maybe even having a greeters ministry that is intentional about that. Invite people while they are there to a group or Sunday school class or to a meal or something. Get the card, the guest card. Make certain that you have quality preschool and children's ministries to keep the kids happy. And if you have a stand and greet time, make certain that you are greeting in addition to that stand and greet time, not only that time. And then you have to have a powerful greeters ministry. Whether your church is running 30, 300, or 3,000, it is absolutely critical. How important is it? Well, it's so important that we're going to spend the entire next video talking about greeters who get guests to return. So, can you double the number of guests in your church? Absolutely. These are some of the ways, but one of the primary ways is what happens with the greeters ministry. So, shortly, you'll be receiving video 3 on how to double the number of guests who return to your church. And when you get that information, we will be talking specifically about the greeters ministry. So thanks for being here for this one. Remember, at the end of video 4, I'm going to be giving you an incredible free gift it's just one of the most used, best tools you can have for getting guests to return. And I'll be giving that to you and give you more information later. Come back for video 3, greeters who get guests to return, and I'll see you in that next video.